My name is Maya Collins. I was 31 years old the morning Daniel said my sister's name at that kitchen table. I'm 35 now, and I want you to understand something before this story goes any further. I am not a woman who falls apart easily. I grew up in a two-bedroom apartment in Pilsen on the south side of Chicago. My mother, Renee, worked the front desk at a physical therapy clinic for 22 years. My father, Gerald, drove for a regional logistics company until his knees gave out, and then he drove for himself. Neither of them had college degrees. Both of them had a ferocious, quiet pride that I absorbed the way children absorb everything, without knowing it was happening. I put myself through DePaul University on a combination of academic scholarship, Pell Grants, and waitressing Thursday through Sunday at an Italian restaurant on Randolph Street where the cheapest pasta was $72 and the busiest nights paid my rent for the week. I graduated with a degree in health administration and landed a position at Northwestern Memorial Hospital as a compliance analyst 18 months later. By 30, I was reviewing multi-million-dollar vendor contracts, flagging regulatory violations before they became federal problems, and training staff twice my age. I say all of this not to impress you, but because it matters to the story. The way I was raised, careful, meticulous, nothing wasted, is the reason I survived what came next. It's the reason I didn't just survive. It's the reason eventually I won. Daniel and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Bucktown when I was 24. He was funny in the specific way that draws you in slowly, not performing, just observant. He noticed things. He remembered what you said 3 conversations ago. We dated for 2 years, got engaged at Millennium Park on a Tuesday in November when there was almost no one there, and got married in a small ceremony at a botanical garden in Glencoe with 43 people and a string quartet that played a Stevie Wonder song as I walked down the aisle. We bought the townhouse on Oakdale Avenue the following spring for $410,000. We had $47,000 in joint savings. We had a golden retriever named Birch who slept at the foot of our bed and destroyed exactly 1 throw pillow every 6 months, like clockwork. We had Tuesday night dinners and Sunday morning farmers markets and the ordinary, specific, irreplaceable texture of a life built between 2 people who chose each other on purpose. Daniel was not a villain in the beginning.
I want to be precise about that.
He became something I didn't recognize. But before that, before Ashley, he was the man who drove 40 minutes in a snowstorm to bring me soup when I had the flu. He was real. We were real. That's what made it so hard to understand. And that's what made it so hard to forgive. What they didn't know was, I was already 6 weeks pregnant when he asked me for a divorce. Let me tell you about Ashley. 2 years younger than me and in another family, in another story. Maybe that gap wouldn't have meant anything. But in our house growing up, 2 years meant everything. It meant I was the one who figured things out first. First job, first car, first apartment, first person in our family to finish a 4-year degree. And for as long as I can remember, Ashley watched me do it with an expression I could never quite read. I used to think it was admiration. I was wrong. It was inventory. She was taking notes. Not on how to build her own life. On how to take mine. The first time I noticed it in a way I couldn't dismiss was when I was 26. I had just signed the lease on my first solo apartment, a 1-bedroom in Andersonville, 3rd floor, exposed brick, the kind of place you feel proud of yourself just for being able to afford. I told my family over Sunday dinner. My mother hugged me. My father nodded the way he nodded when he was genuinely pleased but didn't have the language for it. Ashley smiled and said, "That's so cute, Maya. Good for you."
Good for you.
The way you'd say it to a child who finally tied their own shoes. 3 weeks later, she signed a lease in the same building. Different unit, same floor. She told my mother she just loved the neighborhood. She had never mentioned Andersonville once in her entire life before that dinner. I let it go. People moved to nice neighborhoods. The second time was harder to dismiss. I had been dating Daniel for about 8 months. Things were serious. We'd met each other's families. We were talking about the future in the way that feels real instead of hypothetical. I brought him to my parents' house for Easter. Ashley was there. She was charming in the way she always was around men, a little softer, a little more attentive, asking the right questions at the right moments. I noticed her watching him. I told myself I was imagining it. After dinner, when Daniel went to help my father carry dishes into the kitchen, Ashley leaned over to me and said, "He's really something, Maya. You'd better hold on tight."
I thought it was a compliment at the time.
It was a warning. It was also a statement of intent. The third time, and the one I am still most ashamed of missing, was about a year before the divorce. Daniel and I were going through a rough stretch. Nothing catastrophic. The kind of friction that builds when two people are both busy and neither one is slowing down enough to tend to what matters. I made the mistake that millions of women have made before me. I talked to my sister about my marriage. Not deeply. Not specifics. Just the vague, tired honesty of someone who needed to say out loud that things felt strained. Ashley listened. She nodded. She said, "You deserve someone who makes you feel seen, Maya. I hope Daniel wakes up." I remember feeling grateful for that sentence. What I didn't know was that 3 months before Daniel sat me down at that kitchen table in the rain, he and Ashley had already been meeting for lunch. Then dinner. Then everything else. She wasn't hoping Daniel would wake up for me. She had already made sure he wouldn't. The pattern was always there. I had simply been too busy building a life to see that someone else had been quietly deciding to step into it the moment I turned around. The divorce moved fast. That was the first thing that surprised me. Daniel had clearly been planning it longer than I had understood, because within 3 weeks of that kitchen table conversation, he had already retained a lawyer, a firm on Michigan Avenue that specialized in high-asset separations. I know this because the first piece of official correspondence arrived at our townhouse addressed to me, and the return label had their name on it. I stood in the doorway holding that envelope for a long moment before I opened it. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't told anyone because I was still trying to understand what was happening to my life. Because I was going into work every morning, sitting at my desk, reviewing vendor contracts for regulatory compliance, and functioning at full capacity while my entire private world was quietly detonating. That is what I was trained to do, by my upbringing, by my profession, by every version of survival I had ever learned. You assess. You document. You do not fall apart in a place where falling apart costs you something. The divorce terms were not complicated because we had agreed to keep them uncomplicated. The townhouse would be sold. The joint savings, $47,000, would be split equally. I would take Birch. He would keep the furniture he'd brought from his bachelor apartment.
Clean. Fast.
Agreed. What was not agreed, what I had not been consulted on, was the timeline of what came next. Daniel and Ashley were engaged 4 months after he filed. I found out the way you find out things in the social media era. A photo posted on a Sunday evening, her left hand extended, his face behind hers, both of them grinning at a rooftop restaurant in River North. The caption read, "He asked." Obviously, I said yes. 47 people liked it before I closed the app. My mother called me that night. She didn't mention the post. She talked around it with the careful, exhausted neutrality she had apparently decided to adopt, the voice of a woman trying to love both of her daughters without choosing between them. I understood it even as it broke something in me. I told her I was fine. I told her I had to get up early. I hung up the phone and sat on the floor of my new apartment, a 2-bedroom in Lakeview I had rented for $1,850 a month, chosen quickly and practically because I knew I would need the second bedroom, and I allowed myself exactly 1 hour of being completely undone. 1 hour. Then I got up, washed my face, made a list, and started thinking. The wedding was 7 months later.
Small, they said.
Intimate. Family only, they said. I was not invited. Let me be precise about that. Maya Collins, the older sister, the original wife, was not invited to watch my sister marry my ex-husband in front of the family we shared. My mother went. My father, to his credit, did not. He told my mother he had a prior commitment and spent that Saturday helping me assemble a crib in the second bedroom of my Lakeview apartment. He never said a word about it. Neither did I. We just built the crib together, and when it was done, he stood back and looked at it and said, "This is a good one. Solid." I was 6 months pregnant. My father was the only person in my family who knew. But the moment, the specific, crystalline moment that I return to when I think about the point of no return, came 3 weeks before the wedding. My mother had organized a family dinner at her house in Bridgeport. I assumed it was just dinner. I arrived to find Ashley there with Daniel. First time I had seen him since the divorce was finalized. First time I had been in the same room as both of them. I was 5.5 months pregnant and wearing a structured blazer that had been hiding it successfully at work. It did not hide it at a family dinner table. Ashley noticed first. Her eyes went to my midsection and stayed there for 1 second longer than they should have. She said nothing. Daniel was cordial, strained. The way people are when they have decided that being civil absolves them of being decent. Then my mother, meaning well or perhaps not meaning anything at all, said, in front of everyone, in front of Daniel, in front of Ashley, "Maya, are you eating enough? You look tired. You really need to start taking better care of yourself now that you're on your own." On your own. Ashley looked at her plate. Daniel looked at his phone. I looked at my mother and said, very quietly, "I'm fine, Mom. I'm taking very good care of myself." I left 30 minutes later. I drove home in the dark on the Kennedy Expressway, and I made a decision that I have thought about every single day for 4 years since. I was not going to tell Daniel about this baby. Not yet. Not until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. Not until I knew what kind of man he had become and what kind of life my child would be stepping into. I had spent 6 years married to someone who turned out to be a stranger. I was not going to hand him my son before I knew whether that stranger was safe. That decision, the one that looked like retreat, was actually the first move. Ethan Daniel Collins was born on a Wednesday in March at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where I had worked for 6 years, which meant the nurses on my floor knew me by name, and the attending physician had reviewed my charts with extra care. He weighed 7 pounds, 4 ounces. He had Daniel's exact jawline and my mother's eyes. He was the most complete thing I had ever seen in my life, and I sat in that hospital bed at 2 o'clock in the morning holding him while the floor was quiet, and I thought very clearly, I will not let this be a tragedy. I will make this a foundation. I named him Ethan. His middle name was Daniel, not as tribute but as documentation. A paper trail that began at birth. Because here is what my career as a compliance analyst had taught me above everything else. Documentation is not bureaucracy. Documentation is power. Documentation is the difference between what happened and what can be proven. I had documented everything. Starting from the night of that family dinner, the one where my mother told me I looked tired and my sister stared at my stomach, I began keeping a file. A private folder on an encrypted drive that I backed up to 2 separate cloud accounts. Dates. Conversations. Screenshots. The Instagram engagement photo with the timestamp. Text messages from my mother that referenced the wedding, Ashley, Daniel. A note from my OBGYN dated 4 months before the divorce was finalized, confirming the pregnancy, confirming the conception timeline. That conception timeline was critical. Ethan was conceived inside our marriage. Before Daniel filed. Before the separation. Under Illinois family law, that fact carried significant legal weight, specifically regarding paternity, child support, and the question of whether Daniel had any undisclosed financial obligations at the time our divorce settlement was negotiated. That $47,000 split. The clean, fast, agreed-upon divorce. Daniel had agreed to terms without knowing he had a son. And I had signed those same terms without disclosing a material fact that a family court judge would almost certainly want to know about. I am not a family lawyer, but I work in a field where I read legal language for a living, and I knew enough to know that I needed to speak to one immediately. I retained a family law attorney, a woman named Patricia Osei, who operated out of a firm in the West Loop and who had 17 years of experience in Illinois custody and support litigation within 3 weeks of Ethan's birth. Patricia did not judge me for waiting. She assessed the situation with the same calm precision I appreciated in people who were genuinely good at their work. She told me that because Ethan was conceived within the marriage, Daniel had both rights and obligations. She told me that child support in Illinois was calculated on a formula based on income, and that Daniel, as a commercial real estate broker, had verifiable, documentable income. She also told me something I had not fully processed until she said it out loud. If he has remarried and his household income has increased, that actually works in your favor, Maya. Courts look at ability to pay. Daniel had married my sister. Ashley had a marketing job at a mid-size agency on the Magnificent Mile. Combined household income, based on what I knew from LinkedIn and what Patricia confirmed through standard discovery, was somewhere in the range of $210,000 to $230,000 per year. My income as a compliance analyst was $87,000. I was a single mother with a son in daycare that cost me $1,400 a month. Patricia pulled up the Illinois Child Support Guidelines on her screen and turned it toward me. I looked at the number. I had not expected to feel powerful in a lawyer's office 8 weeks after giving birth. But that is what I felt. Not vengeful. Not vindictive.
Clear.
The specific clarity of someone who has been operating in the dark and has just found the light switch. That was the moment everything shifted. I told Patricia I wasn't ready to file yet. I wanted to watch. I wanted to understand the shape of their life before I introduced the fact of our son into it. She advised me on what I could and could not legally delay, and we agreed on a window of time that was reasonable, documented, and defensible. I went home that night and looked at Ethan asleep in the crib my father had helped me build, and I thought about the word patience. I had been patient my entire life. I had been patient while Ashley moved into my building. Patient while she charmed my husband at Easter dinner. Patient while I watched a photo of her engagement go up on a Sunday evening. Patient while my mother told me I looked tired at a dinner table where I was already 5 months pregnant. The difference now was that my patience had a purpose, and a timeline, and an attorney. Did I want to be very clear about something? I did not plan the grocery store. I did not engineer the encounter. I was not standing in the frozen foods aisle of Mariano's on North Clark Street on a Thursday afternoon in October with any intention other than buying Ethan's preferred brand of mac and cheese and a rotisserie chicken because it had been a long week and I was tired. Ethan was 4 years old. He was wearing a blue puffy vest and the kind of small sneakers with a Velcro strap that children wear when they haven't graduated to laces yet. He was standing slightly behind my left leg, the way he did in unfamiliar situations, with one hand wrapped around my knee. I turned the corner at the end of the aisle, and Daniel was there. He was taller than I had remembered, or maybe I had just stopped picturing him. He was reaching for something on the top shelf. A box of something, I genuinely don't remember what. And when he heard the cart, he turned. The moment his eyes found my face, I saw the exact sequence move through him. Recognition.
Surprise.
The beginning of that strained cordiality I remembered from the dinner in Bridgeport. And then his gaze dropped. Ethan was looking up at him. Ethan, who has Daniel's jaw and Daniel's exact shade of brown eyes and the particular set of Daniel's brow that I had looked at across a kitchen table for 6 years. Ethan, who was 4 years old and therefore born approximately. Daniel was clearly doing the math. Approximately 7 to 8 months after a divorce that Daniel had believed was clean and complete and settled. Daniel's hand was still extended toward the top shelf. He didn't complete the motion. He just stopped. The box stayed on the shelf. He looked at me. I looked at him. I did not say anything for a long moment because I had imagined this moment or something like it for 4 years, and I had always imagined myself knowing exactly what to say. Standing there under the fluorescent lights with a rotisserie chicken in my cart and my son's hand on my knee, I found I didn't need to say anything at all. His face was saying everything. Maya. His voice came out smaller than I expected.
Daniel, I said.
He looked at Ethan again. Ethan looked back at him with the open, uncomplicated curiosity of a 4-year-old who doesn't know yet what any of this means. How old is he? Daniel asked, almost a whisper. 4. I said. He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. I counted. When he opened them, he said, Is he? Yes, I said, before he could finish the sentence. Because there was no universe in which that sentence needed to be completed out loud in a grocery store in front of my child. He looked like the floor had dropped away from him. The exact feeling I had sat with at a kitchen table in the rain 4 years ago, watching him set down a coffee mug with a chipped handle. I recognized it immediately. I felt no satisfaction in that recognition. Not then, in that moment. Just a kind of solemn symmetry. I gave him my attorney's contact information. Patricia Osei's card was in my wallet because Patricia Osei's card was always in my wallet. I had been carrying it for 4 years like a key I wasn't sure I'd need, but refused to leave at home. I handed it to him. I told him to have his lawyer call hers. I told him we had a lot to discuss, and that I preferred to discuss it through proper channels. And then I finished my shopping, paid for my groceries, and drove my son home. Patricia filed the paternity and child support petition the following Monday. What happened next moved with the specific, grinding momentum of family court, which is to say it moved slowly, and it was thorough, and it was merciless in the way that documented truth tends to be merciless. Daniel did not contest paternity. He couldn't. A DNA test confirmed what his own eyes had already told him in that frozen foods aisle. What he contested, through his lawyer, was the support amount and the timeline of my disclosure. His attorney argued that I had deliberately concealed the pregnancy to disadvantage him in the divorce settlement. Patricia had anticipated this. She had been anticipating it for 4 years. She submitted the full documentation file, every dated entry, every medical record, the OB/GYN note from before the divorce was finalized, the timeline of the separation, the speed of Daniel's own legal filings, the documented pattern of family events I had attended while pregnant and visibly distressed, the text messages from my mother, the Instagram post with the timestamp. She also submitted something I had almost forgotten I had, a written letter dated from the month after Ethan's birth, addressed to Daniel at his current address, explaining the pregnancy and offering an opportunity for acknowledgement and discussion. A letter that had never been sent, but which established on paper and with a notarized date stamp that I had considered disclosure and had made a documented, thoughtful decision about the timing based on concerns for my child's well-being. Patricia had suggested that letter 4 years ago. I had written it and sealed it and given it to her to hold. She had been holding it like a card at the bottom of the deck, waiting. The judge reviewed the documentation file. He reviewed Daniel's income records. He reviewed Ashley and Daniel's joint tax return from the previous year, $218,000 combined, and he reviewed my single income return and my daycare expenditures and my rent. The monthly child support figure that came back was $2,340, retroactive to Ethan's birth. 4 years of retroactive support, calculated at a proportional monthly rate, amounted to just over $97,000 in arrears. Daniel had 30 days to respond to the order. I remember Patricia calling me to read me the number. I was at my desk at work, reviewing a vendor contract for regulatory compliance, doing exactly what I had done every single day for 4 years. I wrote the figure down on a notepad in my careful, professional handwriting. I stared at it for a moment, then I thanked her, hung up, and went back to the contract. But there was something else. Something that Patricia had not anticipated and that I had not designed, which is sometimes how the most complete justice arrives. Not engineered, just waiting. During the discovery process, Daniel's attorney had requested financial disclosures from both sides. Standard procedure. In preparing those disclosures, Patricia's paralegal had cross-referenced Daniel's business filings. He had incorporated his real estate brokerage as an LLC 2 years earlier, and found something that Daniel had apparently not thought relevant to disclose. A property, a small commercial unit in Logan Square, held under the LLC, valued at approximately $340,000, which Daniel had purchased 11 months after our divorce was finalized, using, as seed capital, $23,500 from a business account that had been opened during our marriage and had not been included in the marital asset disclosure. $23,500 from an account that had existed while we were married, that had not been on any document I signed. Patricia went very quiet on the phone when she found it. Then she said, "Maya, I need to ask you something. Did you know about a business account in Daniel's name during your marriage?" I thought about it. I thought about the vendors, the LLC name, the real estate filings. "No," I said. "I did not." "Then we have a second matter to address," she said. The original divorce settlement was reopened. The reopening of a divorce settlement is not a dramatic event. There is no courtroom moment where someone slams a gavel and a villain is exposed in front of a gasping audience. It is paperwork. It is discovery requests and financial affidavits and opposing counsel sending emails that get longer and more careful as the situation becomes more serious. It is a process that moves at the speed of institutional machinery, which is slow and unglamorous and absolutely devastating to the person on the wrong side of it. Daniel was on the wrong side of it. His attorney, the Michigan Avenue firm that had handled our original divorce with such confident efficiency, withdrew from representation 4 weeks into the reopened proceedings. I don't know the exact reason. Patricia speculated, professionally, that they had not been informed about the business account at the time of the original filing and that their withdrawal was a form of self-protection. Whatever the reason, Daniel had to retain new counsel. That took 3 weeks and cost him, by Patricia's estimate, somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000 in retainer fees alone. The undisclosed business account, the $23,500 that had seeded the Logan Square property, was examined carefully. Under Illinois marital property law, assets accumulated during a marriage are presumed to be marital property unless clearly documented otherwise. Daniel's position was that the account had been opened with premarital funds he had received from a family inheritance. His documentation of that claim was incomplete. The inheritance records existed, but the direct transfer trail, the paper trail connecting that inheritance to that specific account, had gaps that his new attorney was unable to close convincingly. The Logan Square property was valued at $340,000. A formal appraisal put it at $347,500. My share of the marital asset, under the settlement revision, was calculated at $82,000, representing my proportional claim on the undisclosed capital and its appreciated value over the period since the divorce. I want you to hold that number alongside the other one. $97,000 in retroactive child support. $82,000 in settlement revision. I am not a person who thinks in terms of scores, but I am a person who was raised to understand that what is taken from you has a value, and that value does not disappear simply because someone decided you wouldn't notice. They had counted on me not noticing. They had counted on the tired, humiliated woman at the kitchen table in the rain being too broken to look closely at anything. They had counted on grief doing what grief often does, blurring the edges, making the details feel irrelevant when the emotional wound is large enough. They had counted on me signing the clean, fast, agreed-upon settlement and disappearing quietly into my smaller life. I had signed the settlement. I had disappeared. I had built a smaller life. But I had also, quietly, carefully, over 4 years, made sure that every single thing that had been taken from me was documented, dated, and retrievable. The consequences for Daniel and Ashley arrived in the way that financial and legal consequences always do, not all at once, but in accumulating waves that restructure everything. The $97,000 in retroactive support was ordered paid within a structured timeline, with wage garnishment attached as enforcement. The $82,000 settlement revision was negotiated over 6 weeks and resulted in a lien against the Logan Square property, which Daniel was ultimately forced to sell to satisfy the obligation. The Logan Square property sold for $361,000 in a market that had appreciated since his purchase. After the lien, the legal fees, the retroactive support arrangement, and the costs of the reopened proceedings, Daniel's net position, the financial foundation of the life he and Ashley had built, was fundamentally altered. I don't know the precise number of what remained. That was not my concern. My concern was Ethan. But here is what I do know, because it came to me not through attorneys or court documents, but through my father, who still occasionally spoke to people who knew people in the way that fathers from the south side of Chicago quietly do. Ashley and Daniel's marriage did not survive the proceedings.
I did not celebrate that. I want to be honest about that.
There was no part of me that popped a bottle of champagne at the news. What I felt was something closer to a very deep, very tired exhale, the kind you don't realize you've been holding until it finally leaves your body. Their marriage had been built on a specific story. The story of Daniel, the man who had outgrown a relationship that no longer served him, who had found something realer and truer with someone unexpected. That story required, as its foundation, a version of me that was diminished, tired, on her own, struggling. The woman their happiness had been constructed against. When I turned out not to be that woman, when I turned out to be the woman with the encrypted documentation folder and the family law attorney and the sealed notarized letter that had been sitting in a filing cabinet for 4 years, the story stopped working. And when a story that two people have built their life around stops working, sometimes the life stops working too. I don't know who said what in that house when the papers started arriving. I don't know if Ashley felt betrayed by Daniel's hidden account, or if Daniel felt betrayed by Ashley's role in the collapse of his first marriage being so thoroughly documented, or if they simply discovered that the foundation they had poured was thinner than either of them had admitted. I know that 18 months after the grocery store, they were separated. I know that my son Ethan has a father who shows up to scheduled visitation in Lincoln Park every other Saturday morning at 9 o'clock and who has not missed a single session since the custody agreement was finalized. I know that Daniel looked at Ethan the first morning of that first official visit with the specific expression of a man reckoning with time he cannot recover, and I know that I felt something complicated and human about that, not pity, exactly, but a recognition that loss is loss, even when it is deserved. I know that my mother, who spent 2 years carefully navigating neutrality, called me on a Tuesday evening 6 months after the settlement was finalized and said, "Maya, I owe you something. I don't know how to say it right, but I owe you something." I told her she didn't have to say it. She said, "I was so afraid of losing Ashley that I kept almost losing you. I think I did lose you for a while." I sat with that for a moment, and then I said, "You didn't lose me, Mom. I was always here. I was just waiting for things to be safe enough to come back." We talked for 2 hours that night. It was the first real conversation we had had in 4 years. Ethan fell asleep on the couch beside me halfway through, his small hand resting on my arm, his breathing that particular slow and steady rhythm of a child who has no idea how much architecture was built to protect him. I looked at him while my mother talked. I thought about the crib my father had helped me build, about the $1,400 a month daycare receipts I had kept in a folder, about Patricia Osei's business card in my wallet, about the sealed letter with the notarized date stamp, about the compliance training that had taught me, years before any of this, that the most important thing you can do when something goes wrong is to document what actually happened, not what you wish had happened, not what you're afraid of, but what is real and true and provable. I thought about the woman at the kitchen table in the rain. I wanted to tell her something. I wanted to tell her that the floor does come back, that the elevator catches, that the 6 words that ended one version of her life were also, without her knowing it, the first 6 words of a different one. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. And if you've ever been underestimated by someone who is supposed to choose you, I hope you remember that their version of you is never the true one. If you're in a situation right now where you feel invisible in your own life, document everything. Retain your clarity. Build the foundation. Your moment is coming, and you will be ready for it. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new here, and if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.